Good evening. Welcome to SCI-Arc. Tonight's lecture is by Natasha Case, CEO of Coolhaus. And some of you got to know Natasha through her designed objects in the parking lot. And I'm glad you came back after you had the ice cream. I'm going to start off with kind of a game. Let me show you a bunch of pictures and see if you can guess what they all have in common. Tom Ford, George Takei, Weird Al Yankovic, Simon Garfunkel, Seal, Queen Noor of Jordan, Samuel Jackson, Benjamin Netanyahu, and, of course, Ice-T. I'm sorry, Ice Cube. Always get them mixed up. That's how cool I am. Well, some of you might know this, but all of these people originally studied architecture. And they went on to do other things, or did they? The image they represent is in stark contrast to maybe more traditional images of the architect. But tonight's lecture casts a very different image. This is from your website. And I think the question that I find interesting is, although in interviews Natasha says she left architecture to start this very large company in cuisine, namely ice cream, I'm entertained by the possibility that she is continuing to do architecture while invading another medium entirely. Natasha studied architecture, urban design, and Italian studies, I think also was listed in your bio, at Berkeley. And then she studied architecture, getting her master's at UCLA in 2008, where she had studios with our friends at UCLA. She then took a very big gamble, and it sounds like you pretty much took everything you had and invested it in an ice cream truck, and took a big chance communicating what you had at Coachella Music Festival, and then you kind of blew up. And then she has continued to operate a string of very fetishized, high-end ice cream shops, and then it just started ballooning, kept ballooning, and now she has a sizable company with many people working for her. She's been written up in media endlessly, like, for example, Forbes 30 under 30 for food services and so on and so forth. And she's become a bit of a power broker in cool high-end food services. It sounds so, I don't know, banal to say food services, you know? But maybe it's better to say, please welcome an architect coming to talk to us, speaking to us through a very unique medium. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Yes, once again, I'm Natasha. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Coolhaus Ice Cream. And as was said, my background is design and architecture, and I've become an ice cream lady. Some may say it's strange or it makes no sense, but I'm definitely here to share why I actually think it makes a lot of sense. And to kind of tell you a bit more about how I got there. I think as well, like I don't know if it was a misprint in some of the articles, but a lot of people do ask me, would I ever go back into architecture? And I do, I agree with you. I do feel that I've never left. I feel that it's about, bringing a very different perspective into another discipline. And I think that can actually be hugely valuable. So I'll share with you some of the reasons why. So firstly, I think a huge parallel is just about curiosity and learning and understanding like what your obsessions are, what really makes you tick. So before I tell you more about that, I actually want to share this video that we made with you guys. Groundbreaking, meticulously crafted, assembled by an expert team of food architects, farchitects, if you will, comprised of the finest non-artificial ingredients, taste tested by the most discerning palates in the world.
That is the best one I've ever tasted.
We've developed the most sophisticated, high-performance ice cream innovation. For what? Just to sit there looking pretty? No! We did it for you. You're the ingredient that makes Coolhaus come to life. I started Coolhaus because I wanted to make ice cream as real as you are. Ice cream as inventive as you are. Ice cream as iconic as you are. That's pretty iconic. Ice cream so good, it'll make you flip your shit. I've always believed John Mayer is right about only one thing. Your body is a wonderland. So treat it like one. Have fun with it. If you want to act like a kid, I say, do your thing, you know? It's true, we're groundbreaking and meticulously crafted and all those big words I use at the beginning. We take ice cream very seriously, so you don't have to. Coolhaus, ice cream as awesome as you are. Look, there's me and Cindy. I love that. So, pretty fun video, right? This was actually the first and only video that we created ourselves about our story to really talk about our brand. And we just made this last year. So we've been in a lot of videos. We, Food Network, Pop Sugar, Eater. We, are kind of a featured brand in the stories they're telling, but we had never really made something about ourselves because I think it takes a really long time to understand what you're about. And you can see in the video, there's some of the kind of core foundational story elements. You see the iconic architecture in the background. It's meant to look like, the beginning, like a car commercial, Coolhaus is best in class. But a lot of the lifestyle elements, a lot of understanding, who our culture is and what's special about our product. It took a really long time, and I would say it's definitely like an ongoing journey to understand what we're about. And I definitely think in architecture, that kind of looking internally and really understanding what it is about you that brought you here is always going to be part of that journey. Storytelling. So this has become so huge in consumer brands. I'll just tell you a little bit more about mine. So I think for me, coming from an architecture background, I was searching for a way to make it just really fun and accessible, more fun and accessible. I think I thought that a lot of people found it intimidating to come and be part of the conversation. At Berkeley, when I would tell my friends what we were learning in studio, they would say, that sounds really awesome, but I have no idea what you just said. And for me, that was kind of a red flag, right? We're doing this for people to, use our spaces or to connect. And so, I was searching for this way. How am I going to really, open up the conversation? And my light bulb moment was in one of my studios. I had created a scale model, and a professor of mine criticized it, saying it looked like a layer cake. And I thought, why is that a bad thing? Layer cakes are delicious. So I baked the next iteration of the model as a cake. And it was the only all-nighter that I pulled in all of undergrad, which is, don't know how I pulled that off. But I stayed up all night with this model because I just had so much fun with the material. I thought I'll never be tired of this. This combines two of my passions, food and design. And when I presented the model to my colleagues the next day, I could tell they were just much more intrigued than my typical presentation. They're probably thinking, when she's done yapping, do we get to eat the cake? If you ask people what they remember from that studio, that's a memorable moment, and that's what food does. We let our guard down, it brings us together, it's fun, it's engaging. And I thought, this is it. I'll use food as the medium to talk about design. And I continued to play with this idea all through undergrad and through grad school, kind of on my own time. I started calling it FARchitecture, food plus architecture, silly sounding word on purpose. And it took me all the way to my first real job after grad school, which was Disney Imagineering. And I was there, I think about a month or two before the recession hit. And so as part of this, FARchitecture umbrella concept, I started baking cookies and making ice cream from scratch in delicious flavors and naming the combinations after architects. And I would give them out to colleagues at Disney who had maybe gotten some bad news. So, sorry to hear that you've been, laid off, but here's a Frank Berry, here's a Mies Vanilla Row, here's a Minimalism. I'm in like a warm space for these puns. And people would kind of, feel a little bit better, but it was really just more of a passionate hobby. And I met the other founder, Freya Estreller, and she really saw the business potential in what she ironically called the elitist ice cream sandwiches. And I thought, I'm trying to make it not elitist, but I understood. And she said to me, what's the cost per unit? How are you making these things? And I said, I don't know. I went to Whole Foods and I spent $80. She was like, okay. We're going to go to Whole Foods and we're going to write down what everything costs. We're going to make a pro forma. No idea. But we went to Whole Foods. We did the exercise. Of course, I love to, do financial analysis now. She definitely got me much more excited about that. But I think what was most important about this trip to the grocery store is we walked down the freezer aisle. And we saw, these brands that have been, selling for years, they're so stagnant. They've been not really innovating, not really bringing anything unique to the space, product-wise, flavor-wise. And there was really no dialogue of, handcrafted, artisan, and all these words that are now so much more commonplace in food. But I think most importantly, what I see now is that the brands just really didn't speak to us as millennials, and definitely not as women. And we thought, why can't we make the brand let's make the brand that we want to buy, that we want to see? Why not us? Why can't we represent what that brand is going to look like for our generation? So, we saw the white space, we wanted to act, but we thought, okay, how are we going to bring this to market? We didn't really understand grocery yet. We could not open a scoop shop back then. There was just, money was so tight. There was no, getting loans. There wasn't this whole kind of talk around investment like you see more today. But we thought one thing we could do is a truck. It was the moment of the whole chef-inspired mobile food truck, movement just sort of taking off. Kogi had just begun, for example. And we thought, let's reinvent the ice cream truck for our generation. And we Googled, literally, hipster ice cream truck. Nothing comes up, which is so unusual anyway in a Google search. So that was it. That was the zeitgeist. We knew we had to act. So we found a beat-up postal van on Craigslist, pictured there, with no engine. It did have chrome rims, though. That's pretty much what we were paying for the $2,500. And we towed it to LA from Valencia, had no engine. And then we needed an event to launch at. So we begged and begged Coachella Music Festival to let us sell there. I think we annoyed them so much that finally they just said, okay, just stop bothering us, you can sell here. So we thought, okay, we're in. Coachella, the day arrives, how are we gonna get the truck there? Remember, it has no engine. We had figured out that if we joined AAA Platinum, we got one free 200-mile tow. So that morning we pretended the truck broke down, even though it never drove. And we towed it to the desert, and that is what you're seeing there. Don't ask me about anything regarding that sign or the truck or why the group of friends that we brought in exchange for tickets are doing like gang poses. But that was the very, very humble beginning that we launched with. I would say it was a true minimum viable product. Just get it out there and see what happens. After Coachella, a friend of mine wrote for Curbed at the time and said, if it goes well, send me your logo. I'll do a little piece on you guys. And so I said, great, I think we've got something here. This is going to continue. People seem to really like the product. So I sent him not even a vector-based file of my logo, a JPEG of the logo, shameful for my architecture degree. But he posted it with a really even not flattering article. He wrote something along the lines of, if you're really bored and you want to try this weird architecture meets ice cream concept, maybe check out the truck or maybe not. But thanks, Dan, for that piece. Really helpful. But it didn't matter. It went viral. It went to Apartment Therapy, Dwell, very interested in the design background and pivoting my career, LA Times, Angelino, the whole ride home from Coachella, I was fielding calls from editors. And I called Freya to tell her what was happening, and she said, I'm really glad that you called, because we had made a Twitter account, like barely, before Coachella. She said, I think our Twitter account has been hacked. We're getting a new follower every second. I'm getting all these alerts. I said, that's actually real. This is blowing up. By the time I got back to LA, we had 10,000 followers, which seemed like a very big deal. And first from there, we started to grow the truck business. That was the proof of concept we needed. And a few years in, we opened our scoop shop in Culver City. I think we wanted to explore using that as kind of a community space, a space for testing new flavors, for innovation. And then we launched in Whole Foods, which I'll tell more about later. And that grocery business has since grown to about 7,000 doors in every state in the U.S. Everything from your local Bristol Farms Gelson's to Pavilions, Ralph's, Publix for any of those from the Southeast, Wegmans for those from the Northeast. So the business has grown quite a bit. So that's my brand story, and I can't say how important it is these days to tell it and for people to know about it. I think what's really, really speaking to folks and brands is transparency and knowing who's behind what you're buying. And they want to know everything about you. They want to know what you do on the weekends, who you love, what you like for breakfast. The more you're willing to share, the more connection there is, and people are voting with their dollar. And so I would say I definitely believe that a part of architecture is about telling stories, whether your personal story or whatever that story may be. I think it definitely relates, and there's I think really interesting ways to do that. For me, starting at Disney Imagineering, they're the ultimate storytellers, right? In the rides, in the parks, in the hotels. So that was definitely something that I think inspired me. Architecture meets storytelling. And then I think these stories become, your brand values. In the beginning of Coolhaus, a really, really key part of what we would talk about was, changing your career path. Coming out of the recession, a lot of people were being faced with, am I going to have to take an alternate route than I had planned, or how can I possibly stretch what I've studied and what I learned, what I know, into a new space? And I think people found it very relatable, the way we had kind of, explored what it looks like for an architect to create a brand. But as time went on and as we grew, one thing that we started to really notice is we were becoming the biggest women-founded and led ice cream brand at grocery. And why are we not talking about this more? Why are we not sharing that element of women leadership with our following? So we actually went out and we became women-owned certified, which is basically a lot of paperwork, and then they come and audit you at your office, which I found interesting. As follow me to the bathroom, just make sure that you're a woman. I guess I don't know. But anyway, we got the certification, and we put that front and center on our packaging. When we had that touch point there, when we made that really, really crystal clear, that's become the biggest, I think, talking point in our social and even with retailers, looking to represent a different perspective with the brand. And so that's become a much more dominating part of, not only the story, but how we articulate in values. We have a culture of really strong women leaders, and also men who like to be in that environment. And very much about empowerment and very much about inspiring that in our customer. This is, I think, my favorite of all the parallels. I think, I really do think of entrepreneurship and architects in a similar way that you're kind of, an artist within rules. You're creative, you're visionary, you're really, in a way, thinking so outside the box, but you're very, very bound by reality. And I think there's a really this idea of like going deeper into those rules. The more you understand them, the more you can break them. Kind of like, you're willing to play in the sandbox, but maybe you want to build your own sandbox. So, we share in common that ideas created and products and buildings, they must function. They have to work. They have to pass inspections. Yours may be building and safety. Mine is health and safety. There's accountability to that reality, and you need to have economic viability as well. I could create a crazy ice cream product that's just so insane and over the top, but if no one can afford to buy it, it's really kind of ironically worthless. So some examples of this for us, I think, is some of our crazier flavors. For example, milkshake and fries. So it's interesting, a lot of people will ask like how we go through the process of developing our flavors. One thing that's come to play more and more as I've grown the brand is we have more and more access to data. Not only has that become more sophisticated, but we have the luxury now to be able to buy a good chunk of it. We can find out everything about our competitors, how they're selling, how quickly they're turning at what store and where, which flavor is doing this, what price they're selling at, how often they're going on discount. You can really know a lot. So it's interesting to look at that data for potential flavor opportunities, but data can also really lie, and it leaves out actually what sometimes are the best ideas. So sometimes, we look at the numbers and say, okay, there's opportunity to kind of maybe Coolhausify a really strong flavor profile that no one has really elevated and made premium. But my favorite way to come up with flavors is when we kind of just do a weird PR stunt / joke in our shops and try something out. And that's how we, then look for inspiration. For example, so this milkshake and fries, we were kind of trying to play with the idea of people who, dip their fries in a shake. Any of, come forward. This is a safe place if that's you. Yes, very good, good for you. And we launched this in the shop. And again, we weren't expecting it to be much more than a draw for people to come and taste it. But we couldn't keep it in stock, actually, for a year or two. It just would fly out of the shop. And we thought, why are we not considering this flavor for grocery, for bigger scale? And so in order to do that, though, it had to kind of go through a lot of this, viability, right? Like, for example, we had to build it in a way to make sure that, as far as the food science was concerned, it could survive if it's being shipped all around the country. We had to make sure that the fries, if it's going to maybe have a little longer shelf life than something in our shop, doesn't just turn soggy, on the shelf. So coating it in fat or coating it in chocolate, playing around with those ideas. We had to use smaller pieces and find a way to make the fries and the malt smaller, because when you're producing at scale, you can't have big chunks of things in the ice cream. It's a totally different dynamic. But originally it was called fast food. That name wasn't going to work at Whole Foods. They said they wouldn't sell anything called fast food, so we renamed it Milkshake and Fries. So it kind of went through, this reality check, but I'm really proud to say that some of the biggest Safeway regions end up picking it up, and for a while it was actually our second fastest moving pint. So I'd say that was like a success story of that. Another super, super weird flavor, we created this mustard ice cream this summer with French's mustard. And I think for this one to make sense at all, it had to be actually strangely delicious and craveable. And I can tell you, as someone who eats ice cream every day, this was really bizarrely one of the few that I have to go for like a second and third bite, because it tricks your brain. Your brain doesn't know what to do, and it's actually this like super yummy, weird thing. But we actually launched this one with our trucks. And again, it's like, do something totally outside of the box, like people now more expect us to do, but it still has to be something that's interesting and that you actually don't just want to spit out. And then lastly, I would say our plant-based line. This was really a question of thinking about what ice cream even is. And this is a big talk with the FDA right now. Can you even call something like a plant-based ice cream? And, we knew we weren't the first to do a dairy alternative, but we wanted to really think about how can we really build something from scratch and actually satisfy people who love ice cream and don't need to be dairy-free, and they're going to want to eat this too. And we found peas, brown rice, and cocoa butter as the base, which my 95-year-old grandpa said, absolutely, please do not make ice cream out of that, until he tried it. But, again, proud to say that I think this one was, a really big risk for us, and we predicted in about, 2 or 3 years that half of our business will be plant-based ice cream. So, as an entrepreneur growing a food brand and architects, the client element, that we're client-based, that this is a service for someone else. We may not have a single client in everything we do, besides our catering business with our trucks, for example, catering someone's wedding, coming to an event like tonight. It's really about many clients, like consumers at a grocery store. But we do, in the end, the way we design things, we think about it as though we're designing it for one person. So we've been doing a ton of consumer research, particularly this year, where we really build the profile of who that person is. Nothing super shocking here, except for the last one, which we index the highest of any of these stats with a household that has, 1 kid. And that was a really big surprise for us. We actually had thought before this research that we were designing our products for probably someone who, was, out of school and working, but really buying groceries for themselves. It's not the most inexpensive ice cream on the shelf. So someone who, has a little bit of that expendable income. But this was a big surprise. So now we're thinking, our target is parents who they really probably want to buy the ice cream for themselves, but they're excited to share it with their kids too. So that really changed a lot about how we thought about who we're creating these for. And we really lean in so hard to satisfy everything about what this person could possibly want when they're buying ice cream. In fact, we stock them. And so, just get tons and tons of information about, how often they're eating Coolhaus, what other brands they're eating, where they're buying it from. Every little thing that we can do to put this together, and then we do create this like one target, and everything is about satisfying them and making sure that you have that, as we call it, heavy user, someone who's gonna fall in love with what you're doing. Jack of all trades. So, as a founder, I think you have to kind of approach at least the beginning period as a generalist. And I would say, in architecture, there's so many facets that you touch when you're, in a project. You have to know a little bit about so many things and a lot about other things. And starting a business is not unlike that. So that's, I would say, kind of what it took to get it off the ground. And then, eventually, and I'm lucky enough that we've gotten far enough where you really start to, collaborate with specialists. Which is, again, I think, huge parallels in the design world. So, this is as of just this year that we brought in a CFO and VP of Ops who was from Talenti Gelato, for those who know the brand, and he started there when they were about 15 million in sales, which is about where we are now, and grew the company to about 200 million, and there was an exit to Unilever for, much more than that around that time. So someone who's really kind of dialed in to the specifics of what it takes. And then our president, who I'm sorry, but she just refuses to have any photos taken. But she did the same thing with Udi's gluten-free brand, even when they were much smaller. And so they just bring so much to the table. And for me, I'm learning so much from them. And I think that's kind of the entrepreneur's dream, that you get to a place where now I can focus on the things that really inspire me, now that I've kind of done more digging into what I like about doing this. And for me, that's mainly the innovation and also the brand. And they can run the other aspects of it so that, we can all create the best product together. And then lastly, I would say the craft. Craft is something we definitely have in common. For us, I think when we think about building products, definitely there's the flavor element. The pint turned on its side is our milk and cookie crumb. And this is really designed to be like the end of if you've dipped an Oreo in a glass of milk, like what's left over that then you want to drink. So forget about cookies and cream. This is like, that's all done, and then you're just, taking the rest to town. So how do you kind of recreate that moment and that emotion, that memory in the ice cream flavor, and build that from the ground up? But for us, it's a lot also about like the infrastructure of the pint. We think about how big is that swirl going to be? How thick is it? How dense is it? Do we need pieces of something else? You know, how does it look when it swirls in the pint? Is it sort of like look like a little tornado or more like a barber pole? You know, we really think about how we construct everything. The cookie and the ice cream sandwich, we're super proud of. We really designed this cookie, and it took years to perfect, to be soft out of the freezer, to be just the right size, thickness. It has to really be able to hold the ice cream there, be soft but pliable. And there's a reason why we're really owning the whole space for super premium ice cream sandwiches. It's because it's a huge pain in the ass to make a really good cookie and ice cream and have them work together. So I recommend no one else try it. But you know, I really do think of it as we are architecting, you know, these products, and that kind of thoughtfulness about craft has definitely come to play for me. And then, you know, lastly, the packaging. I actually did all the packaging design myself until this last year. So, you know, go architecture degree in a more literal sense. But I always love doing it and thinking about it differently, approaching it differently. You know, again, I think we've thought a lot about it, and we've done a ton of iterations over the years, and having that background has been hugely helpful. I don't think there are many CEOs and consumers in consumer products who could literally go in and, you know, and create that themselves. So it just gives a really good, authentic connection to the brand. Okay, so I share a lot of ways where I think it makes sense, but I definitely think there's ways it doesn't make sense to go from architect to ice cream lady. Maybe that's why there's only one of us that I know of right now. But I'll kind of share those, and hopefully they're enlightening as well. In consumer goods, I think there's probably a much faster, more abrupt moment when you just totally stop designing, because a lot of opportunities can come up, and sometimes it's a question of getting what you're creating out there in a timely way, or that window is gone. I'm a big, you know, fan, especially early on. I mean, the stakes are a little different now, but early on, of minimum viable product. So an example of that was our launch at Whole Foods. We launched in, I think, 2014 in 3 Whole Foods locations with 5 ice cream sandwiches. And the way we did that is I just literally wandered into a Whole Foods, and I asked the guy stocking the freezer aisle what it would take to get on the shelf. And he connected me to the person at Whole Foods at the time who did that. Her official title was Regional Forager, very Whole Foods of yore, pre-Amazon. And I talked with her about my vision. She happened to be an architect by training. Who knew? I talked to her about my vision with the brand, and maintaining the quality, and you know, that would also mean maintaining the price point, which was then $5 for an ice cream sandwich. I kind of had some PTSD as a child of the 90s of all the high-end brands who went to grocery and just totally, you know, brought a kind of really not so delicious product from, for example, like think of like Wolfgang Puck to the Wolfgang Puck pizzas. Sorry to use his name, but that was just kind of the strategy at the time. You didn't think about, I don't think consumers had that transparency with a lot of food products back then. So I really wanted to maintain quality and not make it feel like a compromise. You know, we kind of talked through this vision, and she was on board. And then when it came to designing the packaging, what I thought is, you know, I want these ice cream sandwiches to sort of be like in like a little mini truck, and that it's like the truck is parking in your freezer. You're bringing the truck home. And I wanted to use this chipboard box because I was worried about the ice cream sandwich getting damaged. So the problem was the chipboard box was quite expensive, so we couldn't do any metallic ink. Our trucks are really shiny and bright and more like chrome. Couldn't afford that, and we couldn't afford any differentiation between the different boxes that the 5 sandwiches were in. And someone with an architecture degree put the logo only on the top and very small. And the only place to put what the flavor name was also on the top of the package, which was a black and white sticker, because that's all we could afford. So you could imagine this at Whole Foods, and it was like, you know, you walk in the freezer aisle, and it was like this dull gray line, you know, where you couldn't really see what it was. So we had a couple months of this test at Whole Foods, and they sat down with me and they said, you know, somehow people are finding your product We believe it's the best kept secret of Whole Foods, but they're finding it. You must have, a devoted following. But you've got to do something about this package, and then we think we can grow it. So we quickly went to the drawing board and we said, the product wasn't getting damaged. We can switch to this metallic foil bag, which saved a ton of costs. We could have a lot more variety. We could bring in a lot more color, put a picture of an ice cream sandwich on it so people know what it is, and all of those things. And sales actually grew 1,000% in that first year from the box. So I think that definitely worked. But it was more important at the time to just get something out there than nothing. And I guess we are lucky, that we have done so many versions of the packaging. There's a little bit more to undo a building, let's say. But that's very much, I think, an ethos in consumer is, get it out there and learn from what you're doing and just grow it from there. Cost of goods sold, definitely a big difference for us. We are very accountable to our stuff, to our inventory. We are constantly buying tons of ingredients and making, finished goods and having to sell them. So there's just a huge amount of marketing that goes into making sure the product is moving and that we're creating loyal customers. And then one of the biggest things is the creative timeline. So the grocery stores only reset the shelves once a year, generally from March to May. So if you work backwards, we have to ship to our distributors in order to get there in January, February, which means that packaging has to be completely submitted and done, at least 60 days, sometimes 90 days before that. And then a few months before that, you're meeting with the buyer to show them what you've got for the next year, which means you have to at least have a prototype and a mock-up done. So all said and done, it's really this full year calendar, so it's quite rigid. You might get lucky with maybe a seasonal offering that you can kind of sneak in another time of year, but I would say it's really it's kind of a pretty unique way of thinking about it, and there's so much that goes into the time value of money with how you think about the design process through that period of time. Exit strategy, another big one. So this is I don't know if anyone follows kind of what's been going on with brands getting bought this past few years, but it's just been bananas in my world. There's been so many strategic acquisitions of much, much smaller brands. And I think, though, it's interesting, and I think it could actually, thinking about why that happens, could be really valuable for architecture. For us, a huge part of why a brand like us would get bought is our innovation. So something like our plant-based line that, I think, sure, a bigger multinational like Unilever and Nestle could develop it, but I think what they don't have is kind of a certain amount of trust and obsession and loyalty from that consumer. And we have the ability to take bigger risks and move a lot more quickly than they do. So something like the plant-based and our stake in the ground there is, it's not like a low sugar, it's not a better for you option. It is as decadent and delicious as the ice cream, just much kind of cleaner ingredients. I would say it's kind of the impossible foods kind of, thesis about versus hamburgers. The novelties, this is a really, really big reason that we might get acquired. What's really cool about the novelties, as I said, there's a big barrier to entry, for example, with the ice cream sandwiches. It's really, really hard to innovate both the cookie and the ice cream perfectly. You see mostly interesting pints happening right now, and there's a reason for that. A lot of times you have to own and you have to create this equipment from scratch for novelties. So we've had to do that with the sandwiches. We are next looking for 2021 at reinventing the ice cream, the Choco Taco as a taquito. And we're looking at bite size because we found our consumer doesn't have a way to satisfy the bite size needs, which is also known as thinking that you're only going to take one of a container of bonbons, but really you're going to eat the whole thing anyway. We all know it's true. But there's no equipment right now that can make a product like that, except for one brand out there called Dibs. And I personally don't taste anything when I try it. So someone can do it better, I believe. But we will have to create this equipment from scratch, and we will own the intellectual property. So I think, I really do like that about my industry, that you're really owning what you're creating. and that belonging to you is even more value. So, just for food for thought, literally. And then last would be, our strategic retail partnerships. So Whole Foods actually asked us to develop these single-serve cups of dairy-free flavors, for example, dairy-free Dirty Mint Chip. We made it just for them. They saw the need for it. They wanted to bring it into the space and launch it in Whole Foods Global, so we do that for them. A strategic buyer, for example, Kraft Heinz, they may not even have a relationship with Whole Foods as big as they are. So you might get bought just for the fact that, you have this special connection, and that being a smaller but more innovative brand can bring them into new territory that they literally can't touch without you. So, to say that I don't know if I've convinced you to join me as another ice cream lady, or we're so on the same page because sharing some other friends and colleagues who are also architects rehabbing in the food space. Barnana, which is like a snack brand that upcycles bananas, is former architect. These are friends of mine from UCLA that do a really cool supper club called Food Shop. You probably know Cafe Cognoscenti, also former architect, has multi-unit, and a fellow Berkeley grad who does Slanted Door, all coming into the space. And I think it's not a total accident. I think that there's a really big value proposition in terms of what you're learning and how you can expand it and how you can apply it to these other fields. And I just encourage you to think of it, not as something you're having to come out of, but something that really gives you a totally unique perspective and brings so much more value than someone going a more traditional path to get to that same end game. And that's certainly been my experience with it. So thank you very much. And you probably already ate ice cream, but please eat some more if you haven't.